half hour, Mr. Sinclair. So now please welcome our speaker, Peter Sinclair, as he speaks on energy and the environment.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out and affirming all these values on a weekly basis and for living them the rest of the time. I really appreciate you. I'm going to read to you, start out from a press release from Argonne National Laboratory, one of our federal government's preeminent labs based in Illinois. In regard to a recent study they conducted in cooperation with the National Renewable Energy Lab in Boulder, they looked at 2 sites of photovoltaic solar, sites that were created on former farm fields and then planted with native plants and pollinators among the solar, which is a pretty common practice. It's kind of standard nowadays. And they wanted to see what would happen to native populations of plants and insects and small critters over the course of time. So they observed these 2 sites over 4 years. And just recently published their data. It says, I'll read directly to you. By the end of the field campaign, the team observed increases for all habitat and biodiversity metrics. There was an increase in native plant species diversity and flower abundance. In addition, the team observed increases in the abundance and diversity of native insect pollinators and agriculturally beneficial insects, which included honeybees, native bees, wasps, hornets, hoverflies, other flies, moths, butterflies, and beetles. Flowers and flowering plant species increased as well. Total insect abundance tripled, while native bees showed a 20-fold increase in numbers. The most numerous insect groups observed were beetles, flies, and moths. In an added benefit, the researchers found that pollinators from the solar sites also visited soybean flowers in adjacent crop fields, providing additional pollination services. So, you know, it's no secret to people in here that we are having a worldwide, nationwide, and statewide discussion about clean energy, and solar energy is a primary component of that energy transition. A lot of people have been drawn down social media rabbit holes of disinformation, and so there's a whole lot of fear, and unfortunately, regrettably, there's a whole lot of that fear that has been weaponized as anger and resentment and discord in communities, not just here, but all over the state. And I've been to a few meetings here in Livingston County, trust me. And so I have some of an idea. But, you know, and a lot of these ideas revolve around people's concerns about farmland. And that's why I wanted you to understand what the real research is telling us about farmland. I've also spoken to a number of university experts whose life's work is to study precisely these issues. Dr. Anik Anktil is at Michigan State University, preeminent nationally expert on all aspects of environmental impacts of clean energy. And she told me there has never been a documented case of water or ground contamination from a utility scale solar site. Talked to Dr. David Mula at the University of Minnesota, who said there's a very active area of research now looking at where solar fields are brought in, what the positive impact is on the underlying aquifers, because you're no longer putting pesticides, or very, very few, and fertilizers onto that field. And this is a huge issue across the Midwest. because I believe Iowa is now the #1 or #2 state for cancer, which might be a little surprising because we think Iowa, right? Well, it's a problem. Nitrate in the water and pesticides, is a huge issue. So you'd almost say, wow, we'd like to put more solar out there to give aquifers more of a chance to recover. Solar can be a small part of the solution to that. We've got more to do. But in fact, the actual amount of farmland that is needed for solar is pretty small. Because even for a pretty ambitious build out of solar across Michigan, say, we're only talking about 3.5% of farmland. And we've got 10 million acres. And just to give you sort of an example, we use about 7 to 10% of that land currently for production of corn for ethanol. And there's been some research done on the relative efficiency of solar versus ethanol as a use of farmland. And Dr. Paul Mathewson, I interviewed. He's a PhD with Clean Wisconsin, and you can find this interview on the sun101.org page. They did a comparison, and the comparison they made was if you were using this solar electricity to power an electric vehicle versus if you were using ethanol from the same patch of land to power a combustion vehicle. And by that measure, they found that the solar was 80 to 150 times more efficient use of land than the ethanol. So if we're concerned about farmland, and we should be, because one of the big drivers that gets me out of bed in the morning is worrying about what is happening to our farmland as farmers are facing more and more difficulties with rising costs and rising taxes and encroaching development. They are selling off their farms, and those farms are going to sprawl to subdivisions and strip malls and burger joints and gas stations and concrete, from which, at least in human terms, they will never recover. And all of the values that many people rightfully look for in our agricultural areas will then completely be gone for lifetimes. Whereas if we give those farmers an opportunity to diversify their income, perhaps through in some places wind, perhaps through in some places solar, then farmers, and many of the farmers that I've interviewed tell me this would allow me to keep the farm in the family, to pass it along to my kids. It'll make it more viable for my kids to look at, should they continue the farming? Should they stay in the community? Because our rural communities are hard pressed across the state, as I think everybody knows. We hear oftentimes talking points that people are concerned that moving to solar and wind will make our grid less reliable or more costly. Well, we have numbers. We have numbers that we can apply to that. U.S. News and World Report recently published a ranking of all 50 U.S. states by the reliability of their electrical grid, based on how many minutes or how many hours a year they would have outages. And what they found was that among the top 10 most reliable states, 4 of them were states with very high penetrations of renewable energy. In fact, the top 3, I'm going to say South Dakota, Nebraska, and Illinois are states with a pretty high penetration of renewable energy. Rounding out the top 10, number 10, Iowa has a renewable electricity production well over 62%. I think it was 62% a year ago, but in the last year, I think it's gone like way up into the 70s. Mostly wind, but like with an increasing amount of solar really coming in. So Michigan, by comparison, we have 85+% coal, gas, and nuclear. So in the narrative that we are told that these are the most reliable sources of energy, and that clean energy is unreliable, but coal, gas, and nuclear, those are the most reliable sources of energy. Michigan, with 85% from those sources, ranks 43rd, according to U.S. News and World Report, for grid reliability. So there's not a correlation in the numbers between grid reliability and renewable or not. In fact, if we look internationally, the German grid is famous for having a high penetration, and it's on the order of 50% nationally. So this is I believe it's the 4th largest exporter. It's one of the leading economies. It's certainly the leading economy in Europe, and it's one of our most challenging international competitors. 50% of their electricity is coming from renewables, and their grid is 5 times more reliable than the U.S. grid. And the numbers show that it has gotten more reliable with each incremental addition of renewable energy to the grid. So it's there's just powerful numbers out there to look at here. Another concern that we often hear is that there's going to be a lot of leftover solar panels. There's going to be waste solar panels. What happens to these solar panels, or these wind turbines, for instance, at end of life? And it's a little weird because, we're hearing this from people who 5-10 years ago wouldn't have been too concerned about what was going into the landfill. But suddenly, now that the oil majors are really kind of feeling the heat of competition from clean energy, suddenly their network of funded think tanks and lobbying firms are spreading this meme that, oh my gosh, we're really concerned about recycling. We've always been concerned about recycling, right? So I talked to, there was actually a very nice research paper published in Nature, which is maybe the leading journal on Earth. And even before that was published, one of the authors reached out to me. Turns out he follows my blog. So, and he wanted to talk about it. So I spoke to Dr. Henry Hieselmeier and his co-researcher Heather Merlitz, who's at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and they gave me a few example numbers. So, for instance, if we assume like a pretty rapid build out of solar, enough of a build out to really make a difference in climate change, for instance, over the next 40 years, the estimates, Dr. Hieselmeier's estimate would be that you'd end up assuming no recycling. You just collect all the used panels at the end of 40 years, you'd have 200 million tons of panels. So that includes glass and steel and aluminum and everything else. Sounds like a lot, but that entire 200 million tons would tuck very neatly into like one small corner of one large open pit coal mine. And there are literally thousands and thousands of open pit coal mines around the world. By contrast, we produce and we will produce 200 million tons of toxic coal ash globally in the next 3 months. And coal ash is just about the nastiest substance this side of nuclear waste that one can possibly, in fact, it is a little bit radioactive, but it also contains lead and mercury and cadmium and 100, perhaps thousands of really, really nasty combustion products that we don't want to get out into the environment, but in fact, 90% of the coal ash piles or ponds that have been sampled across the country have been leaking. They are leaking into ground and surface waters as we speak now. So this will be a challenge and a burden for taxpayers going forward. We're either going to pay for that in sickness and disease and toxic water and toxic soil for all eternity, or we're going to have to, as taxpayers, we're going to have to solve that problem. And by comparison, the issue of solar panels seems like minor to non-existent, and in particular because solar panel recycling is now an actual thing. And the developers that I know just presume going in that all of their solar panels that they deploy are going to be recycled at end of life. That's just built into their plan. And I'll just add that we talked about 200 million tons of toxic coal waste in the next 3 months. We hear the same thing where wind turbines are being considered. They say, well, what about all those wind turbine blades? I saw a picture, because I did my research on Facebook, and I saw a picture of wind turbine blades in a landfill somewhere out west. And so all these people that really never were too upset about recycling, now suddenly they're upset and they want those wind turbine blades to be recycled. Well, so by next year, 2025, I believe the number in terms of tonnage of wind turbine blades, and remember, these are fiberglass and balsa wood. They're non-reactive. They don't leak anything. They sit in the landfill and they pay a tipping fee to the communities that accept them, who are very happy to take it. 35,000 tons by next year, compared to 200 million tons 3 months from now of coal ash. So we're talking about things that are like several orders of magnitude removed. And again, factually, now that we have enough wind turbine blades coming to their end of life, that recycling industry is taking off as well. So the major wind manufacturers like Vestas, for instance, have committed to complete circular economy recycling of all of their wind turbine towers, components, blades by 2040. So that's no longer going to be a problem. A few other things. We will hear from time to time that people are concerned about their home values. If clean energy is in my neighborhood, I'm worried that my home values will go down. Well, I would invite anybody to go on to, oh my goodness, what is the real? Zillow. Thank you. God. Zillow.com. And you can find a graph there of what home values have been doing over time. And if you look at some of the counties in the state, for instance, that have wind, because we were told, oh my God, this is just going to sink home values. So Huron County, Gratiot County, Isabella County would probably be three with like pretty large scale wind development. And what you see when you go to Zillow is, those graphs are like pretty stable, 5%, 10%, 16% a year upgrade in property values. And they haven't missed a beat over the last 10 years. And in regard to solar, I had the pleasure of interviewing last week Aaron Bowen, who is a real estate specialist and very highly rated real estate specialist with Cohen Resnick, which is a top 10 accounting firm. And Erin and her team, which is I think 8 or 9 people, similarly well-versed and well-prepared, have looked at 40 solar sites on agricultural areas, utility scale solar in rural agricultural areas across 18 states. And they have found no impact on property values on those sites, including the Assembly Solar Farm up in Shiawassee County, which has been controversial for that reason. It's a fairly small sampling of sales around that one site so far. There's only been 2 sales, but both of them appreciated at values very much in keeping with, if not exceeding, the appreciation of property values in the area. So I want to send you away with some ideas for what is needed right now if you'd like to see this process continue. We had a big victory in November with Governor Whitmer's passage of a suite of energy goals and legislation that puts us on a path. It sets a goal of 100% clean energy that is decarbonized energy by 2040, which I think is appropriately ambitious. And we can talk about there are a number of qualifiers and off-ramps and precautionary trapdoors in the law, but we've set that goal, which I think, for those of us that are over 50, if you look back over your life, you probably recognize that if you don't set a goal, you're probably not going to reach, you're probably just going to be static unless you say, I'm going to go here and then I'm going to go there. So we've set that goal. And part of one of the most important pieces of that was siting reform, because what has happened is that the fossil fuel industry has recognized very shrewdly that the choke point for deploying clean energy across the heartland of America is the sleepy little town hall, township meetings, where people typically have very, boring conversations about, will we have enough porta potties for the softball tournament? Who's going to mow the cemetery lawn? But in recent years, what we've seen is when these wind projects come up, somebody brings in a $300 million solar or wind project, and these people are not only overwhelmed with the scale, but then what happens is through a very highly evolved and coordinated social media network, people literally from all over the state will target a particular township and show up at the meeting to be angry, to be abusive, to be threatening. So farmer after farmer has told me they have been abused, harassed, even physically threatened, simply for seeking to site clean energy on their land that they hope will allow them to keep their farm in the family. And you can find some of those interviews at Sun 101 and Wind 101, sun101.org and wind101.info. So the opponents of clean energy have ginned up a referendum, a petition campaign. So you may start hearing about petition gatherers who are trying to get something on the ballot issue for November, which would repeal the siting reform. And I'm running out of time here, but I'll just relate that what is really telling about that issue as it is written is that it seeks to repeal it seeks to reestablish local control over clean energy, and it mentions solar, wind, and battery storage. It has to be noted that under the new legislation, no solar and no wind and no battery storage can ever go anywhere without the cooperation and indeed the enthusiastic participation of the farmer, of the landowner. And it's been the landowner's rights that have been violated by these evil flash mobs that have intimidated local boards into creating exclusionary ordinances. The new legislation seeks to right that ship by giving an opportunity for the state to get involved if one of these local boards is not able to overcome the kind of ginned up resistance that we see. It's the messaging that they're putting out there has led a lot of people to believe, oh, the big wind companies and the big solar companies are forcing these poor farmers through some kind of eminent domain power to take these terrible energy projects which don't work and they don't want, and it's terrible. Just the opposite. It is just the opposite. The one form of particularly toxic energy development that does have an eminent domain power is gas pipelines. We just had one, it may still be under construction just down the road here. Yeah, they come through and they're very nice about it, but they will take your land and there's nothing you can do about it, and they'll pay you something, but your land is gone. That is eminent domain. And so that is a violation of local control. But that is not included in the petition or the ballot referendum, and there's a very good reason for that, because the leaders of that referendum are trained operatives of the fossil fuel industry. So I just want you to be on the lookout for that, be aware, check out sun101.org, wind101.info, and those are resources that are meant to be shared. You don't have to ask my permission. Please share them. And go on Facebook. Sun 101 and Wind 101 are on Facebook as well. By all means, please, we have to broaden this discussion with good information, and that is how I believe we're going to prevail on this. But it will require everybody's enthusiastic engagement. And so that's why I'm here today, and I thank you so much for your interest and your time and just everything that you do. And I'll be around for a little while. I do have to leave by noon, but thank you for everything you're doing.